Sunday comes again, and here we are. Hey guys, it's Dev, and the continuing saga of vicariously participating in the creation of a musical album that I'm trying to document weekly here. I was talking to a friend of mine about this process and where I currently find myself with the process, which is, the mix starts on Monday for the Power Nerd record. And I recognize how many times I've been through this with the amount of records that I've made, including live records or compilations or DVDs or whatever. There's these benchmarks that happen in the course of the project that are consistent throughout the whole thing. And where I'm at right now is this. It happens every record. It's like right towards the end. It's like you're just so uncomfortable in your mind and in your soul and in your body. And I was trying to figure out where that comes from. And so much of what the workload entails right now is just exporting. So, as I had mentioned in one of the prior updates, the idea is to do a premix of the record here so that all the moves and all the effects and things like that are kind of fundamental to the actual recording itself are taking into consideration. And I export those and I make a new session. And then I send it to somebody in there. I send it to Stanley, who does live sound, and he's essentially mixing the mix. So I'm trying to deliver it as if it were a live band. So we've got 28 tracks of consolidated drums, a DI for the bass, an amp for the bass, a couple of heavy guitars, a digital version and an analog version, the effects guitars, about 12 stereo tracks of synths that I've mixed down from significantly more than that. And then the next thing is to do the vocals, and the vocals are in sets of 4 up to 7 layers, so depending on the harmonies or whatever. But then the idea is to export each of those quads into a stereo pair, and I'll do one version without any EQ, and then another one with my preferred EQ just as a reference. The sound that I've got going with my ambient guitar is not the right one, so let me change the patch. 2 seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. So, it is not meant to be this one. It is meant to be the one that Matt helped with, and that's called Dream Peace Bacone. There we go. All right. Where was I? Here I are. Now this should be better. Now I should have some sound. Yeah, there we go. Okay. That's better. So the thing about making records, specifically with the timeline that I have to do this one, and as I've talked about, the amount of time it's taken to write it has been so little, and we had no time to rehearse it and all these things. But the process of making these records is the same no matter how much time you have. There is certain things that happen along the course of making a record that I believe is what prevents a lot of people from finishing a record. So maybe if you're in a position right now where you've been working on a record or a project or an art piece or a book or something for a long time and you can't seem to finish it, maybe what I'm about to talk about will help in some way. The thing that makes it so uncomfortable at the end is you have to commit. And that's the long and short of it. And it seems like that's a no-brainer. Of course you have to commit. You have to commit to one of the solos that you've put on a playlist, and you have to commit to that particular verse. Like, what is the lyrical aspect of that you've been maybe waffling about? You have to commit. And it's really difficult. It's really hard to do that. Deadlines, as I've said in the past, is what allow me to pass that threshold. If I don't have an option past a certain day, then I have to commit, or else it's just not done. And that helps in the sense that it can complete it, because you've got a deadline, you have to do it. But man, as a psychological exercise, having all those commitments having to come together in the 11th hour is a real psychological strain. And I can see that it would be something that would prevent people who haven't had as much experience with it, perhaps, as I, from ever getting past that threshold. And then maybe they're like, oh, I need another week, or we meant to deliver it tomorrow, but I went through the tracks and I realized there was a bunch of things missing, so we're going to have to hold off. And that's definitely an option, I guess. But a part of me feels that that's just a very clear and deliberate procrastination technique. To say that, I can't do it. It isn't going to be done, and therefore I'm needing another week. But that week turns into a month, turns into 2 weeks, and then you end up second guessing it, and then you end up changing things. And then by the end of it, you're arguably in a worse place than had you just grit your teeth, drank another cup of coffee or whatever it is, and then just taking the song sequentially. I've got it in a rough order. I always do at this stage. So I start with song number 1, and then I go through each track, and then I check the drums, and I check the edits, and I check the bass, and I check everything. And then by doing that, I realize, okay, now I have to commit to this verse. And then I write it down, and last night, I gotta tell you, it's so frustrating. I was writing down the lyrics, and then I was trying to connect with what it was that I was trying to say, but because of the nature of the verse that I was trying to fit it into, there's a certain amount of syllables that feels like it would work, and that confines the statement that you're trying to make to a very narrow parameter of things that it can be. And I'm shocked at how the human brain, at least mine, tends to shut down when it's asked to commit. So I'm sitting there in front of this notepad, and I'm like, okay, Dev, what's this song about? And my brain, it's like, there's nothing. It's like, there's nothing. And then I have to push through that, and then I have to say, okay, this song's about, ironically, it's about resilience. So then you're like, okay, you've got 3 verses, and you've got a pattern to the vocals that since the beginning you've established in your mind as being what you want that verse to feel like. So then you take that pattern, and then you look at what you've determined through significant effort, regrettably, the theme of the song is. And then you think, okay, so how can I make this something that A, is pleasant to listen to, B, is something that rolls off your tongue. So if you're singing along to it, not an audience even, but just as a singer, there's certain words that are not comfortable to say. And I know after so many years of touring that if you commit to a phrase that has a weird kind of flow with the word, like an S and a T together, you can find yourself regretting that lyric down the road, because you're like, that's not it's not a very nice thing to say physically. It doesn't roll off the tongue. So, long story long, the parameters that you establish as a result of the composition that maybe you procrastinate on lyrically because for whatever reason you don't want to commit to a line, or maybe you're afraid of what it is that you want to say, whatever these things are, in the last minutes, and which is currently where I'm at, which would explain my kind of frantic energy right now. It's a type of frustration that's very unique, where specifically if your role as a creator in a musical project is that of engineer, producer, guitar, bass, vocals, synth, composition, mix. All these things start to come together, and you find that the emotions become so much a part of the workload that I understand why there's not a huge amount of people that do everything, that do all the parts of the process, because it requires a type of Jekyll and Hyde determination in the way that you approach the work. I forget the names of the doctors, which was which, but for the sake of this, the Jekyll, I believe, was the sane one, the pragmatic one, and that's the one that you need to really focus on in terms of, okay, we got 2 hours to finish this. Okay, I've got to make sure that there's no clicks and pops in the edits that I've made. When I opened up the final session, there's 36 missing files that are coming from a session that I had done an add to the session as opposed to a copy, and then when I did the copy, blah, 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 blah. So now I have to find those. Now I have to go through each one of the drums and make sure that there's no phase issues between, the top and bottom microphones on the tom, and blah, 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 blah. That's the one side of it. And then you're like, okay, in order to deliver this tomorrow, I have to commit to the sentiment that is this verse. And then when you start to do it, and I don't know if it's just the nature of this project, or if it's just where I'm at as a person, or all of the above, but I'll start singing, and the emotions are so strong that, and I when I say this, I've said this before, and maybe it will give people a false sense of the perceived importance of this record, because it's not just this record, it's all of them, and it's where I'm at, and it's always been this way. But as I go to commit to these final verses, I'm so emotional that you start to cry. And the juxtaposition between what it requires to deliver a project on time, which is the pragmatic Dr. Jekyll side, versus this necessity to participate in the emotional components of what it is that you've created. Or else it's of no, it's just vacuous sound, unless you are willing to commit. But by committing to that, the workload is just so disparate. Because on one side you've got this very sharp angles and computer and logic in terms of the process, not in terms of the DAW, but just it's a logical and incremental step towards a conclusion that I've done so many times that above and beyond the effort, a lot of it's muscle memory. But then on the other side, at the very end, you have to commit to these things. And then it's so emotional that you're like exhausted by the process. And two things spring to mind. One, if you've made a record, the amount of records that come out every week, you see Spotify or Blabbermouth or whatever, the amount of records that come out every week is phenomenal. The amount of people making records and the amount of bands and artists that are going through this process, it's a phenomenal amount. And what I find really funny is that it's all like this. Varying degrees of it. Like, some people don't have all the roles that I've chosen to take on while they're making a record. But the act of making a record, for everybody who does it, is so full of this type of very specific drama that I think it's humorous that you can go through all of this and the existential ups and downs, and and you're doing your best to make sure that you've crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's on the technical side of it. And then in the end, it maybe doesn't work. You know what I mean? It's like you go into these things hoping that your vision that you had in the beginning for a record that acts as almost like a mission statement, like, okay, there is the vision, so my intuition is going to be hardwired towards that emotional sense of that aesthetic, and I'm going to follow that. And I hope, the only thing you can do is hope that by the end of it that translates. But you can lose the plot so quick at the end. You know, the other night I was trying to commit to this song. Like, okay, it has to go out, so I have to commit. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this verse is too empty. It's too empty. And so I start filling it with shit like I always have. And then in a moment of clarity, I was able to, fortunately, pull back from that edge and say, what you're uncomfortable with, what you are uncomfortable with this song, is actually what that initial mission statement was. So don't forget that. And the fact that it's empty in this section is important to the nature of this record, because you're trying to make something that's more stripped back. And so when I added stuff to it, it turned into this version of stuff that I've already done in the past, but because the structure is simple this time, it sounds like not as cool a version of something that I had done in the past. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this sucks. And then I leave it for a night, and I come back the next day and I'm like, oh, the reason it sucks is because you're trying to make it something that it isn't. And what it is you're uncomfortable with, because it's different for you. And so I pulled it back and I was like, oh, right, that's what it is. It's supposed to be stripped back. Right. Just follow your intuition and have faith in it. And again, long story long, what ends up happening to anybody who's making a record and anybody who's gone through this process is when you finally release it, you want people to like it. Of course you do. Of course I want people to resonate with it. Of course I want people to have it as part of their life, that they're able to use it as a way to describe something that they don't have the vocabulary for, perhaps. So that's the musician's job, is to provide that tether to an emotional experience that their skill set can facilitate, right? But if at the end it doesn't work for whatever reason, maybe it's too stripped back, maybe the mix doesn't work, maybe I overthought it, maybe I underthought it, maybe it's half-baked, maybe it was never that good, maybe it's way better than you thought, but somewhere along the line you missed the cue to have a different sound, that, whatever it is. And not just me, but anybody. And it comes out, you want to have like a caveat that you present with each project that you do. You know, like you want to say, oh man, if only people knew what went into this. If only people had an awareness of what we had to work through while this was happening on a personal level. You know, like the parents, or some horrible thing, or some, like a pet got sick, or you got like wicked insomnia and you can't seem to focus through that. And again, this isn't just me, I'm talking about anybody. You would love to be able to have a caveat so that when the record is released, it's got this little liner note that says, this is the shit that we had to contend with while we were figuring this out. Speaker went down. I'm in a new studio, I don't understand what the low end is doing. But any of these things. And in the past, how I've made that sort of virtual caveat is to do interviews prior to the record where I downplay it. It's almost like that's the defense mechanism in the past. I'm like, if I can prepare people in a way and say, hey, I don't know if you're going to like this record when it comes out. I was going through a lot of shit and it was really difficult and we may have missed the mark, but it might be awesome, and all that sort of stuff. But again, I can't do that anymore. All you can do is do your best and then hope that your intuition has guided you to an accurate representation of who you were during the point in time in which whatever record you're doing happens. And it becomes a document to the people and to the struggles and what you were bored of and what you were into and how you were reflecting on your past and how that plays into, your future. And if people don't like it, they don't like it. And if they do, they do. It's another record. It's like one of thousands that gets released every week. I just think it's funny that we all go through this. And knowing that helps, in a sense. Knowing that, I'm like, oh, right, it's this. Fuck, I forget. That tail end and the commitment part and and all this shit. It's all like, right, I forgot. But it doesn't mitigate the way it makes you feel, which is just like really uncomfortable. And you can't escape. It's a type of, it's a kind of lack of comfort that you can't escape. It's like, you try to take a nap or you try and take an afternoon off, and there's this, it's like this worm in your head that's just like, you got to get it done, man. You got to figure this out. You got to sort that problem out. You got to find where that splash symbol file went. You got to find a way to any number of things. But what I remembered, and maybe this will help you as well, is that I always do figure it out. Maybe there's this nagging sense while you're making a record that it's like, oh, this will be the one that I can't figure out. But my track record of 32 records is that you figured it out. Some are better than others based on your circumstance. So, I went through a lot of kind of ups and downs with like Physicist and Z2 and certain things. And then when I think back to the process that went into those records, and then I equate it to what I'm going through now with Power Nerd, I realize that I'm like, oh, this is actually much stronger than those, even though I had a tenth of the time. And when I have those moments with this record in particular, because here we are with Power Nerd, it starts the mix on Monday. May 21st, I'm back in Moth. And in June, I'll be tracking drums for the Moth. So it's like one after the other, which is how I needed to do it on a financial level. But also, it's kind of what I do, right? So it's not like a burden necessarily. But I realized that Power Nerd, in essence, is an experiment for me that allowed me to figure out how the studio worked. To allow me to figure out how to troubleshoot it and to figure out who I can rely on for the team and who I can rely on to do certain edits and which players are going to work for what sort of things and what the studio sounds like and how I sort out the low end and what we use for a summing amplifier and whether or not some of this gear that I've invested in and for my master bus is actually superfluous, and all these things is in a practical way what the Power Nerd record has allowed me to sort out. Every day I'm like, okay, so this ergonomically should actually be here, and that actually doesn't work, and although I thought this was going to work, it's actually too complicated, and this in front of me works, but it should be a little bit to the left, and then by figuring that out, and I'm going to do a studio rundown once I have sorted this out, because I've got another piece of gear that I'm installing for the Atmos, and I'm talking a lot, as always. A couple other thoughts I had this week. When I'm doing these updates, I'm thinking about it. I'm really thinking about it. My career has forced me over the years to recognize the value of analysis. Why? Because when I start doing interviews, I get asked about it. Everybody does. If you're in a band, you'll relate. But if you're not, once you've released a record, there becomes a promo cycle, which lasts for a couple of months. In the past, what they used to do prior to Zoom is that they would fly you places. You'd go to Los Angeles or New York or Germany, wherever your label was situated, and you would do a week of interviews. They set you up in a hotel and they bring you into the office every day, and it'd just be once every half hour. It'd be interview for a week. And even at the level that I'm at, that's what happens. And even when I was at a much lower level, that's what happens. So, as romantic as it may sound to those who haven't done it, it's something that just happens with a record. During that time, you are asked to explain yourself. And in the past, when I didn't think about it that much as I'm clearly thinking about it through the course of these updates, I would still get asked about it. And in the moment, I would have to sort it out. They would say, why did you write this record? What is this record about? I noticed that you have trees in the layout. Why trees? Are there any new types of gear that you used on this record? All these questions are a part of the job and have been such for 30 years. Every time I release a record, there is up to a month of really intensive questions. And because of the nature of the work that I do, a lot of those questions tend to be psychological in nature. So for those who may be watching these updates and think, Dev, you're just thinking too much. You're overthinking this. You're overanalyzing it. I would say this. One, I've noted from the amount of times that I've had to do interviews and came into it unprepared, how unless I've given it even a rudimentary amount of thought, the chances of you making a guess off of what it is that you've written and then that causing you problems in future interviews is almost 100%. So I put a lot of effort into the process while I'm writing now of thinking, okay, what's this about? Why are you doing this? What's your intent? Why did you use that? Why did you have this imagery? What sort of gear did you use? What did you learn? All these things. And so when I do those interviews and people say, well, what did you learn? What sort of gear did you use? What sort of intent did you put into it? I have an answer that I'm confident with. And on a practical level, that really helps me because not having those answers in the moment, what I tend to do is make a guess. I'm repeating myself, but just because I'm sorting it as I'm saying it. I make a guess, and then by doing that, you oftentimes have to refine your answer. And what used to really bother me when I would do interviews from one record to the other is a question that would come up where people would say, on the last album, you had said X, but now in the press release, you're saying Y. That doesn't make sense to me. Please explain. And what seemed to be curious to me is by simply saying, hey, I've grown and I've changed and life changes, and if that isn't the case with you, I'd be surprised. I have to answer that in a way that is frankly really irritating because I'm like, I didn't fucking know at the time. And then my life changed, and then this changed. And so hand in hand with that, which I've recognized over the past week as my reason for the amount of analysis that I put into my work, the humorous and completely ironic counterpoint to the amount of thought that I or anyone who does this puts into the analysis of the work is it plays almost non-existently into it. Your intent, your subconscious drives, your motivations, what it is that your soul wants to sing for whatever reason is going to come through no matter how much you think about it, or conversely, how much you don't think about it. So I guess what I wanted to say is the reason why I think about it and analyze it as much as I do during the process is, again, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. I know I'm going to be asked about it. In the past, it's caused me problems to not have thought about it ahead of time, so it's preemptive. And then concurrently recognizing it doesn't matter how much I think about it. It's just gonna happen in the way that it's gonna happen. I do feel, though, that by spending time analyzing what's happening intuitively, there's a reference point of understanding there that is practical, even when it comes to artwork and discussing what you need from musicians. If you're able to clearly identify, hey, this record has this sort of vibe to it, and the reason it has that sort of vibe is because of this. So you'd be a good player for this. You'd be a good artist for this. That would be a good font for this. It all kind of plays hand in hand. One thing I recognized over the past couple days. So I always have a TV on, and I watch YouTube videos while I'm working. That $10 a month for YouTube Premium is a fantastic investment if you haven't done it. If you're able to, that is a game changer. No ads. But I often look for things that are inspiring, have some degree of a sense of momentum, and aren't distracting. So for years I used the train videos or people driving, point of view. Add to the list of things I gotta sort out the fact that my camera keeps overheating. So I'll try and make this quick before it overheats again. Yes, I look at videos that have some sort of sense of momentum, like trains or cars or whatever. But last thing I wanted to say this week, and this is something that I feel sheepish in admitting. So I've been watching video game walkthroughs, the Cyberpunk and a bunch of them. And upon more investigation on video games, which I've always been very critical of, I'm like, gaming is stupid, whatever. With pie on my face, I recognize now that video games in the industry is actually a very high art. I had no idea. I had no idea how much of an emotional experience that medium could provide for people. And I guess I'm a little hung up because I don't like playing them. It's like I don't like the dexterity and the small motor skills and all the things that come along with being good at video games. It's too much work, frankly. I don't want to do it. It's not fun for me. It's like work. But when I was watching them and I was seeing some of the art that goes into it and some of the way that you can guide somebody in a very like you're invested in this story, and how the music plays into that and the beauty of it, I was like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't realize it. So although I still don't have any desire to play video games, I just don't. I think it's just too much work. I don't want to spend 5 hours to get a golden will not or something, because I got other things. I like Pro Tools as a video game, I guess. But I stand corrected in that I recognize this week how powerful of a medium it is, actually. Surprised I didn't put those pieces together. I've never done soundtrack for a movie or a video game, and I don't know if I'm the right person for it either, because I'm so controlling when it comes to things that I want to do, that unless I had kind of like free reign to illustrate somebody else's world, I would struggle with that, I think. But a part of me wishes I had unlimited resources well, I mean, a big part of me, but for the moth, because I think that would be a cool way, because I've been sort of deliberating about how to present the story. Should it be a film or a musical or whatever? And I thought, man, if you could make a beautiful video game, but I can't imagine what it would cost to put together some of those video games. The amount of R&D and the amount of people and everything to make those things, it's... So I guess the last thing I'll say for this week is I recognize how powerful of a medium that was. And yeah, didn't know. I hope you're doing okay. By the time we talk next week, I'll be deep in the mix. Geez, I hope it's good, you know? It keeps making me cry, and I don't know if that's because I'm just really raw emotionally, or if it's just really powerful. Maybe it's a combo of the two. It's so simple that there's a part of me that feels like, well, it's just got to be your frame of mind. You just got to be in a fragile place emotionally right now. But then I think, no, this is really, really nice. It's really good. But then I think, yeah, but in half a month it'll be over and I'll be on to the moth. So, it's a confusing process, this whole making art thing. And it's touch and go. At any stage of it at this point, it could go sideways, right? And end up being a couple of months easily, or more than that, of just hard work on the behalf of many people that just kind of doesn't hit the mark. It happens. I hope it doesn't happen. Because I also feel that if we do hit the mark on this, it's like super powerful. And if we don't, then it's just, you know, people will be okay with it, I guess. Those are the risks that you got to take, my friends. You know, what's behind the thing you fear is what you're looking for. And I think my fear for this is that by making something that was easier for people to listen to, not easier to make, but easier for people to listen to, that you would be sabotaging your own artistic identity. And I don't believe that's the case. But it's also very new for me, a process like this. Is it going to be good? I'm doing my best, and I hope so. And if it isn't, then that's a accurate representation of this part of my life. So, onward and upwards. I'm rambling now. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.